Hello and welcome back to Kidocracy at Large. I'm Siddhan Chandra, here every Saturday to look at current events and collective conditions in the light of kidocracy. Kidocracy is a call for the rule of minors and minorities, and it is loud and clear in kidocratic education, led by minors and minorities, aimed at adults and the majority through movements like Idle No More, Black Lives Matter, Fridays for Future, and currently in Canada, Every Child Matters. Friends, this Canada Day weekend has been like no other. Before this, only a minority of us questioned celebrating Canada Day. But after the discovery of unmarked graves on the sites of former residential schools, this Canada Day was more or less cancelled and practiced as a day of mourning. Churches were burned, and in Winnipeg, statues of Queen Victoria and Elizabeth II, the current queen, were toppled. And across Canada, non-Indigenous people walked in solidarity with Indigenous people, wearing orange t-shirts emblazoned with the words, "Every Child Matters." It is indeed a watershed moment. The discovery of the remains of children on the grounds of former residential schools is Canada's George Floyd moment, a moment of shock and revelatory horror for all Canadians, and a visible confirmation of something we knew all along. But now, what was once seen could no longer be unseen. A dynamic moment, other than the calls for a papal apology, a spotlight has appeared on the $25 million that the church owes Indigenous people to compensate the survivors of the residential schools. The $25 million were part of the sweeping Indian Residential School Survivor Agreement arrived at in 2005, the largest class action settlement in Canadian history. But as stated in a CBC report, Canada's 12 million Catholics managed to pay only $4 million of the promised $25 million. In 2013, when the federal government pressed the church to pay up the rest, the Catholic Church went to court with high-priced lawyers using backdoor legal manipulations, interpreting the phrase "best efforts" in the agreement, and got away with paying only $1.2 million more. They said their best efforts had raised only that much. Though, in 2012, just a year before, they had built a cathedral in Saskatoon costing $28.5 million. When the church won this case, Stephen Harper's Conservative government chose not to appeal. And that is how the church and state in tandem swindled the Indigenous people again. Clearly, $25 million is not a lot, considering the crimes of the church. And the wealth of the Catholic Church is immeasurable, according to its own reckoning. According to Kathleen Mahoney, a University of Calgary law professor, Catholic Church leaders use the same techniques as other multinational corporations. They decentralize and complicate the legal structure to avoid liability at the higher levels. After all, the Church provided the model of wealth accumulation for colonialism and capitalism. When the Canadian people re-elected Trudeau's Liberal Party government in late 2019 and ubiquitous Christmas music filled the air, I was driven to Nietzsche's Antichrist, published more than 125 years ago, to understand the nature blindness of the Christian global north. And I was blown away by Nietzsche's eviscerating critique of the Christian priestly class, who had invented sin as a way of controlling humanity. And I wrote my anti-Christmas manifesto, updating Nietzsche's insights to the present day, to answer this question. What is at the heart of climate denialism, genocide of the indigenous and animals, persecution of the poor, criminalization of Black, Muslim, and other minorities, and oppression of women, queers, and youth? Nietzsche would say sin, the key invention of the priestly class. From sin emanates last 2,000 years of anti-nature, anti-pleasure, and anti-science Christian propaganda. The story of original sin forbids learning, punishes curiosity, demonizes the snake, nature, and blames woman for her disobedience to God. Sin turned the surplus of human energy or time that should have been spent joyously on science, culture, and noble experiences into a debt, a knowledge deficit that could be milked in perpetuity. With sin, the priests had secured their livelihood and ongoing power, since people's natural urges could be monetized through centuries of sales of indulgences to sinners, militarized towards centuries of crusades against Islam, paganism, and heresy, and scapegoated through oppression of women, witches, atheists, and queers. Once the concept of nature had been invented as the opposite of God, through demonizing the snake, an animal as horizontal as man is vertical, natural had to become a synonym of the reprehensible, says Nietzsche. This demonization of matter, be it nature or the human body seeking pleasure, was bolstered by insisting that man's higher origin, his divinity, was found in his consciousness, in his spirit. Whereas woman, who listened to nature and not to God, was placed closer to the animal in a minoritarian trajectory towards plant life and base matter. This polarization of nature and God, or matter and spirit, fully supported centuries of global colonial piracy. In the Americas, Christian nature hatred took the form of indigenous genocide, crushing of their cultures, culling of the wild buffalo that fed them, and stealing their land for capitalist extraction and deforestation, which continues unabated to this day." Unquote. The victims of the Canadian residential schools were both minors, that is children, and minorities, the indigenous people. Both the state and the church practiced adult supremacy and majoritarian fascism. The only way to combat this is to develop a minoritarian affiliation with the weaker entities of this story, cultivate a deep affiliation with both minors and minorities. In the words of Mumilak Kakak, an MP from Nunavut, from her piece in The Guardian called "This Canada Day, Let's Remember This country was built on genocide. Open quote. Before I was elected as an MP, I gave a speech in the House of Commons as part of a mock parliament for young women. I spoke of the toll that the suicide crisis had taken on my community and of my lost friends, classmates, and teammates, and asked, where are our non-Indigenous allies? As I ask that question again today, I see more of you and more Canadians from all walks of life waking up and showing up. This is a good shift. Indigenous peoples cannot and should not shoulder these burdens alone. They were imposed on us by Canada, and we need Canadians to play an active role in dismantling them. That means staying angry and staying alongside us to amplify our voices. Above all else, it means listening to us and actually changing things when we tell you that we are hurting. She goes on, a good place to start is by getting familiar with the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and the Kikitani Truth Commission. Talk to your friends and neighbors about the need for real Indigenous justice in Canada. When Indigenous groups organize protests and marches, show up and support them. And make sure your elected representatives know that they will never be re-elected if they are silent in the face of injustice. Sooner or later, when we have an election in this country, refuse to vote for political leaders who talk the talk without walking the walk. If enough people do that, maybe Indigenous peoples can have the right to self-determination, and we will have something to celebrate in this country. But the current moment in Canada also has global implications. Not only for the Indigenous people of the planet, but also women and children and other oppressed minorities, including nature itself. The wealth of the Vatican is as immeasurable as its crimes against humanity and nature. Let us call for a reckoning of the Catholic Church's crimes against all humanity and demand a compensation for all its victims. Let us expropriate the Vatican towards a new epoch for nature and humanity, to rewild nature and humanity, which involves a total re-evaluation of our educational systems, deeply contaminated by the Church's anti-nature propaganda. For example, a report in The Guardian yesterday called, open quote, BBC removes bite-sized page on climate change benefits after backlash, unquote. It states the following, open quote, BBC Bite Size, its website for school children, claimed warmer temperatures could lead to healthier outdoor lifestyles, and that a benefit of climate change could mean easier access to oil in Alaska and Siberia. Other apparent benefits highlighted by the BBC included the ability to one day grow more crops in Siberia, new shipping routes created by melting ice, and more tourist destinations, unquote. This is the BBC. This is what we're up against. This nature blindness is ingrained in the very DNA of Christianity, colonialism, and capitalism. 2 years ago, children emerged in huge numbers to teach adults and political leaders the importance of urgent climate action. And look what the BBC has to tell children on that matter. It is clear that humanity is urgently in need of kidocratic anti-fascist education through movements like Every Child Matters, Black Lives Matter, Idle No More, Fridays for Future, Me Too, and so many more. We can look forward to major repercussions globally towards decolonizing, deschooling, and rewilding humanity. I hope to speak more on that next week. Till then, bye.